Cruising determines the volume and quality of each commercial tree species on a particular piece of BC land. While it may be one of the first jobs you get in forestry, it's by no means a second-rate job you're doing. The results of your cruise will help to calculate stumpage rates by estimating the wood in the forest which will be cut. Your job helps ensure that annual cuts on a managed unit are properly administered. When you hear others say, "Why bother? Let's just scale the timber we bring in. It's all the same job anyhow," don't fall for it. The log scaler isn't aware of what's been left back in the woods. So, for the sake of our forests and our future, let's go cruising.
Hey, Cal, look at that sign. It's in miles. You know, it sure would be a lot easier to use the metric system if everyone else was. How do they expect us to learn if others don't have to use it?
Don't let others deter you. People are now using the metric system in many areas of their lives. It is the world-accepted standard of measure, and for BC to be competitive on the world export markets means learning it. So show some leadership. Accept the change. It's not that hard. There are really only two areas where the change to metric will affect you: the metric system itself and your new metric instruments. Avoid trying to convert to metric, as it will only slow you down. Instead, learn to think in metric, and you'll find the change much easier. Here's a tip to help you think in metric. Practice visual estimating by comparing objects of a known size with something unknown. Use an average man or a DBH stick as objects for comparison. Getting used to the new metric measurements is just a matter of gaining working experience with them. The same is true for the new metric instruments. Working with them is the best way to learn about them. You should already be familiar with your new metric equipment, but just to be certain, let's take a good look at them. They are the metric DBH tape, used for determining tree diameters in centimeters and millimeters, the 25-meter cloth tape, used to locate borderline trees and calculate height samples, the 50-meter topographic tape, used in traversing, and the metric hypsometer, which is a guide to quality measurements. Get to know the metric system and your equipment well, as cruises are done primarily for purchases, and a high degree of accuracy is essential. The cruise begins in the office, where the forester in charge decides on the design for the cruise. His main objective is to design sampling plans that produce a uniformity of sampling error that is within plus or minus 15% of the actual volume, 19 out of 20 times. There are many factors involved in choosing the area to be cruised, but once it's chosen, the plots are laid out systematically on a base map. A grid is placed at right angles to the contour, and plots are designated with this in mind. Base and strip lines are located, and distinguishing marks are noted for establishment of the baseline in the field. Once in the field, the point of commencement is marked by a square tree. The most convenient point of commencement is an identifiable topographic feature, such as a road intersection, edge of swamp, or unique bend in a creek. Run the baseline roughly parallel to the contour or along the boundary of the sail. Using the compass and the 50-meter tape, lay down the baseline, making sure to mark it every 20 meters. Check your bearings to be sure you're going in a straight line. Once the tie point for each strip line is established, mark the ground for future reference. Square the tree to mark the start of the strip line, and establish the strip line using the metric traverse tape, the clinometer, and the hand compass. Mark the strip line every 20 meters, and don't forget to make allowances for slope wherever necessary. Strip lines should be designed to run at right angles to contours, and plots should be established at equal intervals along these lines. Having traveled a predetermined distance along the strip line, the true plot center is reached. The nearest suitable tree within 5 meters of the end of the tie line is chosen as plot center. This tree is then squared on all four sides and marked with a strip number, plot number, timber sale number, and the date. You should take care to choose a small diameter tree that is under 10 centimeters. Do not choose a larger diameter tree such as this one, as it will be difficult to sight accurately with the prism. Where there is no tree at plot center, use a stick. If you used an actual plot center that differed from the true one, don't forget to return to the true plot center before traversing to the next plot. The move may have been necessary to avoid forest transition types. There are two main types of plots, a fixed radius plot and a variable radius plot, which involves the use of a prism. Over 90% of operational cruises in BC use the variable radius or prism plot. Since we cannot measure every tree on the cutting permit, only representative sample groups are measured. Prisms are used as an aid in determining whether a tree is in, out, or on the borderline of a sample or plot. Selection of the prism size depends on the dBH of the trees and the density of the stand. In order to select between 5 to 16 in trees per prism sweep, the cruiser should use the rule of thumb. The larger the average diameter of the stand, the larger prism diopter used. Or, the more open the stand, the smaller prism diopter used. Wherever possible, select only one prism size per forest type. It is very important to collect and record sufficient tree measurements, as one of the largest causes of sampling error is not collecting enough of this data, whether they be sampling trees for volume, height curves, or age determination. Averaging 10 to 12 trees per prism plot will minimize this error. Once the proper prism is selected, sweep the plot, making sure that the prism is exactly over plot center, not off-center as seen in this slide. After calculating the distance to border trees and correcting for slope, measure out to the borderline trees. Be sure to measure to the center of the tree at dBH and tag all in trees at dBH facing plot center. This dBH measure must be taken 1.3 meters from the point of germination. Care should be taken in determining the actual point of germination, especially on a slope. On plots with no slope, the prism's flat base must be held horizontal, or the plot radius will be increased. On plots which are sloped, the clinometer and the prism are used together to achieve horizontal. Lay the flat base of the prism on top of the clinometer, and then rotate both until the slope is corrected. Another common problem is hidden trees, which cannot be seen clearly from plot center. In these cases, you must move the prism away from the plot center for sighting, keeping the distance between the plot center and the tree being sighted constant. And remember, always measure with a tape to the borderline tree. These tricks should help you overcome most obstacles you will encounter in cruising. This brings us to the new metric tally sheet. As all tree measurements and forest conditions will be recorded on it, care should be taken to enter this information completely and legibly. Data will be key punched directly from the tally sheet for further evaluation and development of the area. Some information will be entered at the office, but most of it will be entered on the cruise site. All living stems must be recorded, as are all dead standing trees over 3 meters minimum height. Record the tree number for each tree measured, but please, no duplicate numbers on any one plot. Enter the species type in capital letters and the dBH in centimeters. Remember, the dBH is measured 1.3 meters above the point of germination. When a bump or branch occurs exactly at dBH, measure the normal bole above or below the malformation. Tree class, pathological remarks, and quality remarks are probably the most difficult to evaluate, so be sure that you understand all the conditions affecting these remarks. You won't find tags like these to help you very often. Tree classes are numbered 1 to 5, and your judgment is important in determining whether a tree is Class 1, a residual with no indicators; Class 2, a suspect having one of the 8 pathological indicators; This is a fork in the lower third of a cedar. Class 3, a dead potential, which is estimated to contain 50% sound wood. Class 4, a dead useless with no potential value. Or Class 5, a veteran more than 40 years older than the main stand. Pathological remarks will be entered as if the length of the tree was divided into thirds. On the back of the tally sheet is the pathological code, with the numbers 1 to 7 defining the area of the tree affected. These numbers are entered under the corresponding pathological indicator on the front of the tally sheet. An example is this conch in the bottom 1/3 of the tree. It would be entered as a 1 under the conch section. Be sure to record all information, as missed pathological indicators could lead to a substantial error in the final net volume. Quality remarks are fairly new to cruising, and you should familiarize yourself with the various codes listed on the back of the tally sheet. Use the metric hypsometer to determine the height to the first live limb or dead branch and the location of knot panels in the first and second 5-meter logs. A common mistake with the hypsometer is holding it wrong. Be sure to hold it at the top, like a plumb bob, and not as shown in this slide. Holding it this way will give you incorrect information. You can also calculate the degree of lean or slope by sighting through the hypsometer. At the bottom of the tally sheet is a section for entering data on height samples. These are actually a sample of the sample and must be measured accurately. Choose trees carefully from the range of diameters, measuring 1/4 intermediate trees, 1/2 codominant trees, and 1/4 dominant trees. Height samples need to be done for at least 20 to 30 trees per major species. In selecting trees for height samples, pick normal trees and avoid defective ones. As well, the tops of these trees must be visible to the measurer. Don't be too close to the tree. The clinometer must measure less than 100%. And don't measure trees leaning towards or away from you. Sight with your clinometer to the top and bottom of the tree, and with your tape pulled tight, measure from sighting point to center of tree. It's good practice to do the height calculations right there so you can spot any obvious errors. The last of the sampling procedures, and maybe the least liked, is the age sample. We've been told it's a bore. At least you need to do only 2 or 3 of them per plot. Select a codominant tree and bore the first hole as close as possible to the point of germination. Be sure that the bore hits the pith or center of the tree. If you miss, as seen here, the core sample must be redone to get an accurate ring count. Count the annual rings from the center and correct for total age from the tables in the cruising manual. Before you leave the plot, there's one more area that we'd like your opinion on. On the back of the tally sheet is a list of appraisal remarks. These remarks are necessary for the evaluation of the ground conditions in the area, and your appraisal of these conditions is important. Suggestions or restrictions on the type of logging done on the site will be based on your remarks. Now that the cruise is finished, you'll have a good overall view of the site, from soil type to the tips of the veterans. Combined with information from other cruises, it will help guide future planners in the protection of our environment for generations to come. A lot of ground has been covered in this program, some old and some new. The changes you will be facing in using metric will be the easiest part, and your assessment of the quality of timber will likely be the hardest. Time spent on checking your figures is time well spent, so before you leave the plot, let's visually recheck everything once more. Do your plots average 10 to 12 trees? Are there any duplicate numbers on a single plot? Have you missed any of the pathological or quality remarks? Did you get an accurate measurement on all your height samples? Are any of your calculations obviously too large or too small? Did you get enough age samples? If you can answer yes to all these questions after each plot is measured, then let's head back to civilization. but you'll be back again, mapping the future.